Well, in New York morning trade, we are looking at a relief rally, not just in the U.S., but across the globe. Well, Bitcoin initially soared above the 72,000 level on the two-week U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal. And in New York morning trade, we are looking at the crypto major holding right below that level. Well, Q1 2026 turned out to be a whiplash quarter for digital assets, and Bitcoin just closed out its weakest Q1 since 2018, dropping about 22%. And the year actually started with massive strength before momentum faded and selling pressure took over. Now, driven by escalating tensions in the Middle East and a pullback in risk markets, prices swung wildly, but price action is only half the story right now, and global regulation is also reaching a boiling point. Well, joining me here live at the New York Stock Exchange this morning is Dushyant Shahrawat, who is Bloomberg's crypto and digital assets market structure lead. Dushyant, great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Remy. Thank you for having me and having Bloomberg.
Well, first and foremost, we are seeing a rally here on Wall Street, but it is indeed a relief rally. So tell us what's going on in crypto so far in 2026.
Sure. So it's been, many aspects, right? So beyond Bitcoin crypto prices, there's a whole lot of activity going on the institutional side. And I'll break it up into four buckets. And of course, I do want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the global markets because I've done some work around that. But in particular, there are four big areas we're seeing. One is, and this has nothing to do with price action over the last 4 to 6 weeks, but long-term trends is what we are tracking. Massive movement into stablecoins, a lot of activity in the Middle East on stablecoins. We talked about that 2 weeks ago when I was on the show. First of all, great news that with the peace treaty and all of that, but continued use of stablecoins as has been demonstrated during the war times. So that's one, stablecoin growth. I looked at the March numbers, $7.2 trillion of stablecoin volume processed in March alone. That's massive. All of last year was $35 trillion. Second, very relevant to the New York Stock Exchange, putting equities on chain. Massive. 12, 18 months ago, New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, TTCC were not talking about tokenization, now they are. So massive movement on the tokenization side. Third, this esoteric area called decentralized finance, a lot of activity happening there as well. When US markets are closed, global markets are closed, traditional finance is closed, DeFi markets are open. A lot of activity happening there. Fourth, very quickly, and I hate to put two buzzwords in the blender, but the intersection of blockchain and AI, we're seeing a lot of activity in that space. So putting agents using crypto to do agentic payments. Those are the four major activities that we're seeing in this space.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you highlighted those 4 points here in addition to what we've been seeing in price action. So when it comes to the regulatory environment here in the US, what's happening in terms of progress or lack thereof?
Great. So Remy, I'll say that let me categorize this by using an analogy that it's like the US crypto industry was a very sick patient till about 18 months ago. The fever is broken, but the patient is not fully on his feet as yet. And what that means is 18 months ago, we were facing an SEC that had filed 100 lawsuits against crypto companies. Chairman Atkins has turned around, Mike Selig from the CFTC, very different economic environment. US is the largest crypto market, but from a regulatory standpoint, we've been really behind. Very quickly, three major things to keep an eye on. Genius Act was passed last year. That is law, cannot be overturned or can be overturned with great difficulties. That's law, that's great. Beyond that, unfortunately, we've got the Clarity Act, which has passed the House last year, still sitting at the Senate. We don't know what that happens, right? Whether it gets passed or not. That has to get passed for US crypto markets and US crypto industry to be back on the rails for the long term. The SEC CFTC interpretive release, released 2 weeks ago, clarified the role of tokens, jurisdiction between SEC and CFTC. That is just an interpretive release. That can be reversed very quickly by the new administration, whenever that happens in the next couple of years. So on one end, we've got momentum in crypto. From a regulatory standpoint in the US, we're still not out of the woods. And there are other jurisdictions like the Middle East, hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit, Singapore, MICA in Europe, the UK, that are much further ahead when it comes to regulation. So great advancement over the last 18 months, but a lot of room to do more work in the US from a crypto regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, and you mentioned different regions across the globe, and we're watching what's happening in terms of adoption, institutional, as well as a retail investor side as well. But what's happening when it comes to the different regions in terms of actually attracting capital as well as innovation?
Yeah, great question, Remy. So there are about 6 to 7, major regional centers in the world, and we closely track all of them. And what was fascinating is they're all got very different takes and very different speeds and approaches to crypto regulation. US, we already talked about. In the last 12 months, $4.2 trillion of new capital in the US came from fiat into crypto. $4.2 trillion. That's 4 times more than anybody else, despite the fact that we've got the regulatory clarity is not there in the US as yet. Other regions, Europe went very quick and early. They signed MiCA, massive architectural move into the crypto space, a single passport across 27 countries. Singapore, with the Three Arrows Capital and the Terraforma Labs problems a couple of years ago, they kind of, they decided to focus. There were 200 licenses in front of MAS. Only 15 to 20 companies got approved. So Singapore has taken a large funnel and narrowed it down and said, these are the companies we're going to allow to do business in. The one jurisdiction that Hong Kong has picked up a lot of ground last 2 years after China banned crypto a couple of years ago, crypto mining, now they've come out from the cold. But Dubai, the UAE, tends to be, and hopefully with the war, hopefully coming to an end of the next couple of weeks, they'll be back online. But the UAE has been a beacon of hope when it comes to crypto and regulation. They created the VARA, the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, much early on. They are absolutely the center of activity when it comes to crypto trades. So I think, keep an eye on the UAE as a major center of doing things right when it comes to crypto regulation.
And Dee, finally, before I let you go, we have about 60 seconds here. So I know that you speak with many institutional players out there. So can you tell us what specific hot button issues you're paying attention to in your conversations with the clients?
Well, the hot button issue or news of this week, Remy, was Morgan Stanley's ETF, right? Bitcoin ETF that is going to get listed today. That is landmark because all the other ETFs right now have been asset managers, Fidelity Investments, BlackRock, VanEck. We were all waiting for the banks to come. Well, here's Morgan Stanley, the large bulge bracket broker-dealer and bank, launching the ETF. That is a transformational, that is the first major attempt by US banks to enter into this space. I think that is going to herald a lot of other companies coming into the space, and it's yet another step of institutional appreciation and understanding about the space. For Morgan Stanley, it's more of a wealth management play. 16,000 advisors, $6 trillion in assets under management. Now they've got a regulated Bitcoin ETF. Keep an eye on Morgan Stanley and other banks as they come online into the space.
Yeah, Dee, absolutely. We will be paying attention to this Morgan Stanley Bitcoin ETF listing on the NYSE Arca. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Remy.
Thank you.